Push Fed Podcast in full effect. We are live with another episode, with another interview, and this time we got a special treat for you guys. He was here back when the OG days, the OG of Push Effect Podcast. He's been a huge part of this podcast, been a huge supporter, and is now the BKFC champ and owner of Modern Warrior MMA. We got my boy Keith the Rockstar Richardson. How you feeling, my brother?
Feeling good, brother. Glad to be here, man.
Man, thank you for being here, bro. It's you got somebody with you. I'm like, who that? Who's that right there?
Yeah, that's the girl. That ain't the side chick. That's the girl.
Oh, that's the girl. Okay,
that's the girl.
Okay, so we gonna get into that a little later. But it's good to see that my boy Keith, coach of mine too, and he's a hell in the fucking cage. Like even when we're sparring, so I can't even imagine what it is to really fight this motherfucker. He's a fucking animal. So, Keith, take us through the start of your career. I don't think we ever got formally this chance to really go through your career. So take us to the start of your career with it.
Starting out, predominantly, I've been an MMA guy for most of my career. I came from a wrestling background. I was state champ wrestler. When I got out of I passed up a wrestling scholarship to go to the Marine Corps. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I immediately started training, and that kind of became my therapy. When I started, I fought on the first card in North Carolina when they re-legalized it. After the dark days of MMA and the UFC. They'd shut down, and I was on one of the first, I started my amateur career on one of the first legalized cards in North Carolina. It wasn't even legal yet in South Carolina. There wasn't a ton of shows, so I had a pretty quick amateur career. I had already won a belt for Ruckus in the Cage at the time. And then my first pro fight was in Ohio. Had a quick victory. And I've just been rolling through since then. When I first started fighting, they didn't even have the 45 and 35 division in the UFC. It was you fought lightweight or you didn't fight in the UFC. So I was still fighting at lightweight. I'm walking around a little.
I'm about to say, were you even cutting weight? You weren't even cutting weight, huh?
No, I actually was. When I first started training, I was I was all yoked up from the Marine Corps, and I was walking around at about 180 pounds.
Oh,
I'm just solid muscle. I was about as wide as I am tall.
Yeah, right. Why'd you just flex your pec when you did that?
It's still there.
Right,
it's still there.
I was so I'm okay, so one from 180 to 155. Okay, I didn't even know you were cutting. If 155, that seems like now when we look at the MMA
it wasn't a hard cut. It wasn't nearly the type of cut I was doing now. Especially back then, those dark ages. We didn't even really know how to cut weight properly yet. But I was still cutting a little bit, but it wasn't really the type of scientific cuts that we do now.
Right.
We were just trying to figure it out.
And try to get down.
You guys have benefited through all the mistakes that I've made throughout my career.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Hey, and so what made you, pass up on your wrestling scholarship to go to the military?
Because it was shortly after 9/11. I graduated in 2002. That's how old I am. But I grew up in New York. That hit close to home. My brother was in the Marine Corps at the time. He'd I'd kind of seen the effect that it had on him. It was kind of I felt like it was something I had to do, and I've always tried to challenge myself, and I figured that would be one of the biggest challenges that I could do, test myself in war.
And so could you take us through that process of, and you were a Marine?
Yes.
Marine, that was the branch that you decided to serve in. Can you take us through that process of what that looked like when you were serving?
I was Marine infantry, so certified Traeger Polar. When especially when you go to boot camp, it's the hardest thing that you've ever done. up until that point, but it's the easiest thing that you'll ever do in the Marine Corps. All you gotta do is move, like be loud, like listen to instructions and move quickly. Like you're getting yelled at, and like it's unlike anything that you've ever, but it's actually the easiest thing that you'll ever do in the military. I was, when I was in, I spent a good deal of the time in the Middle East. My first duty station, I was in Bahrain. I was with security forces for a year. We were and we did about two months in Iraq while we were out there, because we were reacting to some suicide boat attacks on some of the oil terminals. After that, I went back to the fleet. That's when I was part of 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines Weapons Company, and that's where I really saw my heavy combat tours. I was in Fallujah right after the push, the Battle of Fallujah. We moved in right after. We were initially supposed to move in there for the push, and that would have been crazy. It was good that they extended those guys. It sucks for them because it was a rough battle, a lot of casualties, but the casualties would have been significantly higher for a new unit coming in that didn't even know the AO. So it was a smart decision on their part. But yeah, Fallujah was definitely my introduction to war, and when when we went to Ramadi, that was the master class. At that point, it was the wild, wild west. Constant roadside bombs, RPG, small arms fire, machine gun fire. Several times a week, we were in heavy contact. I lost a lot of good friends out there. Those of you guys that have seen the movie American Sniper, we were operating with those guys, Chris Kyle and their SEAL team. We did some of their insertions and extractions. We were in the city at the same time. We worked with them on a somewhat regular basis. That was some serious warfare.
And speaking of American Sniper, do you think Hollywood, when you see stuff like that, movies like that, what's the closest movie to, I guess, combat in your eyes? Because, with Hollywood, it's shit is not the same as how it actually would happen. It is, if I'm speaking correctly.
Yeah. Chronologically, they they had to mess with some stuff. At the time there was a pretty prolific Iraqi sniper that when it was operating in the area, that was actually the guy that I think killed one of my guys. In the movie, they have a nice storyline. They have him getting shot by Chris Kyle at the with the RPG gunner and stuff like that. That was the he made that shot. It was it was the record shot, but that wasn't the guy that he made it on. They actually wound up dropping a bomb on a building that the sniper was in to finally get him. But it made for I understand it made for a more complete story.
Right.
They're gonna take liberties, and they're gonna kind of move things around to make it a little bit more palatable. Where war's not necessarily a very palatable thing, and probably shouldn't be.
Right.
I would say American Sniper is pretty accurate in some details. Some of the depictions are a little off, and it's it just depends on because everybody's warfare was a little different. The guys in Afghan have a different they were doing mountain warfare in a lot of cases. The guys in Vietnam, but combat's still combat. One thing that is always accurate when I see it is when they depict a lot of the battle scenes in flashback.
Okay.
You're a fighter. You know how when you're fighting, you're so amped up and full of adrenaline.
Sure.
there's so much input into your brain that you can't process everything right away.
For sure.
And then as soon as you start calming down, then you start remembering the fight a lot more and stuff like that, and it starts coming back in flashbacks. That's very accurate. Like,
Oh.
yeah, like that's kind of how that stuff like plays back. Like, because when you're in the moment, like you're operating at such a high frequency, like your body, like your mind can't process all that input.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a second for, like, and then when you go back to when you finally go back to base and like have a chance to like smoke a cigarette, rub one out, do something to get your nerves back down. Yes, there is such a thing called a combat jerk.
And so do you remember the first time? So you were in infantry, right?
Yes.
In actual combat. Do you remember the first time you had to take someone's life?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that you tend to forget.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that takes a toll on military men in general now, or just combat in general? Do you think that's like the biggest toll that it takes? Like remember the first time they had to take someone's life, or the constant taking of life?
I think it's going to be different for everybody. For me, I kind of felt a little bit more mentally prepared, for that. To me, the hardest aspect is survivor's guilt. The guys that you couldn't save, the guys that you couldn't bring back. It's like it definitely takes a toll. Like when you've got to bring out the worst parts of like yourself. It's still like it's not a great part of yourself that you need to tap into to take a human life. Mm-hmm. It's it's one of the darkest part. And when you have to do that on like a daily basis, it definitely can take a toll. You've got to live in this angry, dark world. But it's always like the innocent people and. To me, it's like because I never really hated the enemy. It was just like
a job.
It was just opposition. Really. Kind of like you don't necessarily have to hate anybody that you're fighting.
Right, for sure.
But you will do you do horrible things to them.
Right.
In pursuit of what you're doing.
Right.
So I always had that kind of mindset. I always had the same kind of mindset that I use in fighting. But when you can't when innocent people especially a lot that was one of their tactics they'd start a fight in the middle of a crowded area, and then if people got they didn't care if people got crossed. We'd go through great pains to keep anybody any innocent people alive. Mm-hmm. We to the threat of our own lives. So we do that, so they do that, and when small boys are getting bullets ripped through them, and that takes a toll on your soul.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're training, going back to the boot camp aspect of it, when you're training, did any of that translate into the actual fight? You know how we train. Sometimes it don't come off how you do the drills, Yeah. So is that the same aspect? Am I thinking of it right? Or
that's why that's why Marines train the way that we do. That's why we train under stressful, we try to stress out the situation. That's why you're getting screamed at, people are throwing stuff at you, and boot camp, you get tossed around and stuff like that, because it's a dirty, ugly world, and you've got to be able to operate under the worst conditions possible. Mm-hmm. I remember as NCO, so I was in charge of several Marines. At one point I had 13 Marines under me. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we do is when they're taking apart and putting their weapon back together and stuff like that, dissing ass. Mm-hmm. When we're doing that shit, and I'm throwing shit, cursing at them, kicking them, while they're trying to take because fast forward to when we're in theater, like one of my gunners, his Mark 19 went down, the automatic grenade launcher, middle of a firefight, hopped on the roof of the Humvee, took it apart, put it back together, and got it back into the firefight, in the middle of a firefight. Like, so, do I think like training like that had an effect? Absolutely.
For sure.
Like if you can remain cool under some of the worst situations possible, like that's why we train hard. That's why we train the way we do. That's why we spar when we fight. Like especially young fighters, they need some hard sparring, because like you got to know what it's like when
For sure.
when shit ain't going well and you getting teed off on and somebody's driving their shoulder into your chest and covering your mouth and
stuff that you do. You know?
Like that's why I make that's why I make it nasty and dirty in the cage. Like because that's one of the things that a lot of my fighters say though. Like he ain't nearly as mean as you, coach. Victoria, Victoria from the gym, she did the a super fight, and the girl was smothering her, and she's like, "Yeah, coach, it wasn't the same like when you do it."
And I'm like, because I felt the same shit. Like, what the fuck? Get the fuck off me.